We have three panelists here who are really a very appropriate experts in this area that we are discussing today. My first simple question is, having heard what you've heard about the accidents and injuries in the supply chain of top brands in the country, and auto sector being, one third at least of Indian manufacturing GDP, and employs anywhere from 1 to 3 crore workers, add families as 5 to 10% of India, right? What do you think is the corporate responsibility um, of these brands towards the supply chain and their workers? And what's the opportunity here that they may be seeing but not doing enough about it? They should do more about it. Or it's not an opportunity at all. It's just a cost for India, and forget it. We are cost chasers. Let's continue chasing cost and forget about workers and just try doing cheap production. Vineet, as an HR man who's done ESIC, safety, workers, unions, the works, please.
Thank you, Sandeep. And again, my compliments to you and Safin Foundation. You are really embarked on a very good journey, and I'm sure इसका काफी लोगों को फायदा होगा हमारे देश में, तो बहुत मेरी तरफ से आपको सब शुभेच्छाएं. Coming to brand and reputation, well, my understanding of brand, of course, I am not a great marketer, but basically a brand is a perception or a reputation or an emotional connect with the audience or customers, etc., that companies try to do, which is right. Now, when you talk of this, I'm reminded of a few. There are many cases like this where people have woken up, like 2, 3 of these international examples. The famous one, was the famous Nike sweatshops. Nike,
Yeah.
the world famous brand, and when reports emerged that the way they were getting their products made, and literally that is, you go anywhere to Google sweatshops, you'll get the details. It really shook that company up, and frankly, they understood and they rose to the occasion and took steps. I don't think they had any choice. They're to the wall. The second example that comes to me is of Foxconn. Foxconn, incidentally, you may be aware, is Apple's biggest uh, supplier was in China. And incidentally, that time, reports of forced overtime, employee suicides, working safety, जो आप लोगों ने बताया वो तो बिल्कुल उससे खराब था. They were forced to really act on it. And one of the reasons they pulled out a lot of work from China is also this. HMM, Sandeep ji, UK, and big name. They had serious issues in Bangladesh and Cambodia. This whole low-cost binge that many multinationals or companies, like even Indian companies, rush to. It's not simple. It's got its guardrails. So they also had to really look at the unsafe working conditions specifically in these two countries that were highlighted. And why go far? And I can share two experiences in our country जो आप लोग relate कर पाओ. I talked of Apple manufacturing, which today is big in India. इसकी पहली कंपनी जहाँ काम शुरू हुआ था उसका नाम था विस्ट्रॉन. एंड आप लोगों को याद होगा दिसंबर 2020 में बहुत बड़ा तमाशा हुआ उधर. There was a big strike, and suddenly, of all the people, Apple rushed to the government first. I'm sharing with you very clearly because I have information, because the unsafe conditions and the labor practices came out. Wistron was what Foxconn is today for Apple, and there were 4,000 contract labor and 800 normal workmen. Overtime was galore, beating all acts. Safety and other working conditions were equally bad. And the issue erupted on a thing of wrong payment, timely wages, etc. And everybody got into action. Apple shook. And one of the reasons Wistron was replaced. So these are big brands. And coming to auto sector, there was a famous, better not to name the company, in 2012, where, a death took place in the plant and there's a riot around and many people and managers got injured, etc. It made headlines. And believe me, I can share with you, I was contacted of all the persons by a big investment firm who gets FIs into India. And the person requested me to join a call with about 5, 6 of the FIs. And their question or understanding from me was, hey, tell us one thing, what is the situation in India about industrial relations? How is it, apart from the individual company, where I said it is not fair for me to comment. But on practices in India, how you all handle things, etc., they were very keen to know. So, what I'm saying is, one company's reputation going for a toss on such an incident of safety or labor matters, A, affects the company, and B, affects even the country's investment as an investment destination. And this is my own personal experience apart from what you read in the press. Now, having said that, see, you can always start digging the well जब आग लग जाती है. But the fact is, when you know things, and I was listening, ये जो अभी मेरे कामगार ये जो भाई बहन बता रहे थे कि पानी नहीं है, ठंडा होना चाहिए. फैक्ट्रीज एक्ट 1948 का, मैं अभी की लेबर कोड्स की नहीं बात कर रहा हूँ, उसमें लिखा गया है कि समर महीने में ठंडा पानी होगा. 48 में डेजर्ट कूलर नहीं थे, वाटर कूलर्स नहीं थे, उस टाइम एक्ट में डाला हुआ है. और आज भी अगर कंपनीज कर दी रहे, मतलब इसके आगे क्या बोल सकते हैं. हमारे पास पढ़े लिखे इंजीनियर्स, मैनेजमेंट ग्रेजुएट्स और बड़े अनपढ़ तो लोग हैं नहीं अभी आजकल, मैनेजर्स और ओनर्स. ये है. ये जो क्लीनिंग की बात कर रहे हैं, ये भी 60 साल पुराने एक्ट में लिखा हुआ है. सो व्हाट आई एम सेइंग इज, हमारे देश में कायदा है, जानकारी है, इंटेंट है, मगर इम्प्लीमेंटेशन की कमी है. However, coming to this very clearly, I think what you asked very clearly, reputation does take a hit, will take a hit. It's just that I think there is some amount of what you shared about the audits and all that. It's unfortunate that auditors or even maybe the consulting companies who do sustainability audits, I don't know what they audit, because if you look at the GRI and other parameters on which they are supposed to do audit, it very clearly talks of supply chain audits. And if they are just accepting a report, then I think the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has to really look into how these things are being done. Let's be very clear about it. So, having said that, I know I've taken a little more time, Sandeep, but the fact is, my colleagues will join me in saying is, there is knowledge available. There's no dearth of knowledge. The laws and more laws will come, no doubt on that. Everybody will agree, yes, these things are necessary. But the only thing is, some things like I shared with you, unless the rubber hits the road or some sparks go around, which should happen, wake up is much different. And I can tell you, it's not that nothing has been done in this area. And Madam Bharti Birla ji, she's there. I have been with the employer organizations, and I was mentioning, thanks to ILO, we run what is, or have run, some batches of responsible business conduct, where basically these aspects of safety, labor relations, and governance, etc., are conveyed and facilitated to MSME sector. And ironically, Sandeep and friends, we have covered mostly the auto sector there, supply chain. So we have, I think about a year and a half, done 3 batches, one in Pune, one in NCR, and one in Chennai. Yours truly, sir. About 100 people have been covered. Now, thatly I will push again and we will try again to do it. So there is some work happening, but is it adequate? Is it enough? Not after what you hear and what research you all say. It's a fact.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Vineet. I mean, your point about the reputational risk that brands have and the implication for investments is a point I wanted to pick up also because, we don't go overseas with our reports actually, but it does get picked up. And we know that certain investors, without talking, would take a view on investments and they differentiate between brands as to who's better, who's worse. So it's an important point from current geopolitical view also. I'll come to you, Dr. Sophie. From your perspective, law, labor laws, what's your take on brands' responsibility with your perspective?
I think I will take from what Mr. Vinit Kaul just mentioned. So compliance is very important. At the same time, implementation of laws are very important. What generally been talked around labor laws is we have 44 central legislations. We had 44 central legislations so far, but it was not implemented properly. As we look at ILO standards. ILO standards, especially core labor standards and decent work agenda, has been very clear on at least five indicators. One is freedom of association. The other one is elimination of forced labor, no discrimination at employment and occupation, and no child labor. And finally, which was added in 2022, was about safe and healthy working environment. So we understand that there is this emphasis on freedom of association, no forced labor. In India, we have a very expanded definition of forced labor from the Supreme Court to state that even non-payment of minimum wages is equivalent to forced labor. So jurisprudence-wise, law-wise, we have such expanded view on labor rights. But when it comes to implementation, there is a lack of political will that we generally see around to enforce labor standards. Let's look at the recent strikes that happened in Noida and in multiple places which were underreported across media. We see that the major reason for the strike was non-payment of wages and the long working hours, which is the basic human right, both under the international human rights paradigm and also under the constitutional rights. So non-payment of minimum wage and or longer working hours, coupled with no social security and no safety measures. Look at the vulnerability that workers are currently undergoing. And we also see that even the visible organizations, industrial production units, are not registered or licensed under the law. We all know the story of Munka fire tragedy in 2022. So when you look at the production units across, especially smaller production units, there is definitely fragmentation. Fragmentation is resulting in, especially from the women labor lens, there is feminization, and feminization further leading to ghettoization of very vulnerable, precarious workers. So coupled with non-compliance, coupled with uh, vulnerable standard of workers, we see our compliance standards going down and workers going from vulnerability to precarity to any basic violation of constitutional standards that we talk about from the grand norm in our Bangtan Kata, which is constitution. I'll stop here and come back.
Thank you, Sophie. You talked about freedom of association, and the data point from our 15,000 workers is probably less than 100 workers of the 15,000 are unionized in any shape or form in the supply chain of auto sector, and that obviously creates all this power imbalance and a lack of good working conditions. One question for you before I move to Bharti. You said non-payment of minimum wages is also seen as forced labor. Is it true that overtime rate not getting paid at double the rate as prescribed by law and working hours beyond the labor code is also considered forced labor or similar?
Absolutely. So the
Okay.
concept of wages basically say that wages is for 8 hours working day.
Hmm.
And if anyone is working beyond 8 hours working day, supposed to be paid extra. The
Hmm.
rate is also mentioned.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Hmm.
any underpaid or non-paid overtime working hours would be violation of the wage ceiling that the Act talk about. Because
Right.
ultimately, overtime wages comes under the law relating to wages.
Got it. Thank you. It's a very important point which we had not thought through clearly, and the brands who are here today, I know at least two or three brands who are there today listening to us right now, and these videos go out to all brands later on. Couple
And the
of things.
particular,
One,
I'm sorry, if I
uh,
can mention the case title. The
uh,
case title is Asiad Games case of 1982.
Asiad Games 1982. Team, please note. Just to the brands who are here and other business people who are here, I think you hear about what is now legally forced labor that's producing these components of automobiles. And also, although we don't get involved in this at all, but if the brand CSR departments can think about the living conditions of these workers in the communities around factories. I think that would be good, not just for workers, but your own productivity, your own, quality of components and everything else that gets connected to working conditions. And that brings me perfectly to Bharti, because you work in this area, you know exactly what the brands can do and cannot do, and the decent working conditions that you worked upon in supply chain. What's your perspective?
Thanks so much, Sandeep. I think we are talking about responsible business conduct now, but ILO in 1977 came up with what we call as ILO MNE declaration, which is a declaration which speaks to the multinational enterprises and large national enterprises and the governments to look at how we can promote responsible business conduct, not just in the big companies, but also in the supply chains. This is 1977. And this also refers, this many declaration also refers to what Dr. Sophie mentioned, the core labor rights or the fundamental labor rights, which are the core of the labor rights, which are at par with human rights. So you can, every human, whether it's a contract worker, migrant worker, everyone, piece rate worker, must have, no forced labor, no child labor, right to equality and non-discrimination, and right to organize, unionize, and collectively bargain. And also, as Dr. Sophie mentioned, in June 22, OSH, Occupational Health and Safety, or Safe and Healthy Working Environment, became a fundamental right. So MNE Declaration refers to this. Human and business rights, UNGPs all refer to the ILO MNE Declaration, which was much ahead of its time. It came out in 1977, but its importance has increased over the years now. We see that ILO MNE Declaration is actually being referred by multilateral agreements, trade agreements, due diligence frameworks, which the different countries are now having these due diligence framework, like or market access, through the trade agreements, or disclosure reporting. Like in India, we have the NGRBC, but there are other instruments like UK Modern Slavery Act, which also calls for these kind of disclosures by the companies. So it's not really something new. It was always there, but now we are finding the importance of it to be growing. I think most of the companies see responsible business conduct or responsible business reporting as a compliance exercise. We heard the discussion on audits, for example. Now, it should go beyond a compliance exercise. It is not about compliance. It is actually fundamentally about how companies should manage risk, how they should manage people, and also their long-term productivity and competitiveness. When we are talking about responsible business conduct, we are also talking about what the investors are looking for, what the customers are looking at. I mean, would you really like to buy cars where the people's hands have been cut, or buy sugar from for chocolates if the women have to let go of their wombs? Those kind of things are causing a lot of bad reputation for the businesses. And unless businesses understand that it's a very big business risk that they are taking by not addressing these issues. So it's not about just compliance, it's a business strategy. Most of the time, businesses leave it to the HR department. And I would say that it should be actually at the board level, at the CEO level, where these things need to be discussed, because it's part of that business strategy. You need to invest on it because it is important for the business. It looks at how you can get entry into large global markets. It is about business resilience. It is about attracting good talent and retention, and also about it's about not just your own company. The entire sector gets branded if something happens in the supply chain, and for that matter, the entire country. If something goes wrong in one supply chain, one actor, the entire sector gets blamed for it, and then it impacts the countries also. So the very workers that we are trying to protect also get more into trouble because companies close, workers lose jobs. So it's good for everyone to focus on responsible business conduct. And I think one of the things that we also need to understand is that there is, when we focus on occupational health and safety, and when the companies look at themselves, but also their supply chain and their vendors, it can actually increase productivity, it can improve quality, it can help in retaining skilled workers, reduce absenteeism, and very strong industrial relations. We've done a lot of trainings jointly with the management on occupational health and safety, where we find that if these joint trainings are done, if there is a workers' participation in the OSH committees, for example, then the number of incidents actually reduce because workers know where the problems are. But these things, when they don't happen, they actually create more challenges for workers as well as for the businesses. And I think, when we talk about how much losses companies make, just to illustrate, in one of the ILO study, we found that uh, the global loss because of occupational health and safety, whether it is absenteeism or whether it is people losing the machine operations getting closed, or the payments that need to be made to the workers, there is an actual loss of 4% of global GDP. That's at the global level. But if you actually look at the company level, I'm sure the profits of the company, they will be also losing 4% of their profits, or maybe more, because that's a global average. When it comes to company level, they not only lose this profits, but they also lose reputation, which is very hard to build. So I think it's very important for companies to look at not just themselves, but how they can handhold their vendors, not just for quality, not just for upgrading the material, but also upgrading the lives of the workers who are doing these things. So when they do human rights due diligence, they should build capacities of their vendors to invest on workers, invest on safety. And we've also seen that when it is a brand pressure to do something, the moment pressure goes, the impact goes. But when companies take it as their own mandate, as their own vision or mission, then it's a very different thing. And in that, we really like to congratulate EFI and other employers membership based organizations, because if things come from them, those things are more sustainable. And I think that's very important to have employers organizations, trade unions. And recently we facilitated a bipartite roadmap between employers and workers, the central trade unions and the employers federations, to take this joint responsibility. And I think those could be one of the ways to make sure that uh, these don't remain on paper, but they actually get to the implementation level. Thank you.
And I think that's fantastic. You have all the experience to really tell us and tell everybody else here that this is good for business, and it is not just a moral imperative, right? Which people often perceive as the moment we talk about this issue. This is a real business and economy issue, which brands being so big and so influential, and like you said, if brands could come together and create a joint platform with so much of common supply chain across countries and especially across the state. The three brands which are big in Haryana, three brands which are big in Maharashtra, if those three brands came together, even that state, and tried doing things with the state government, this could shift and it'll be good for everybody. There is no doubt about it, right? So, thank you. A couple of anecdotes you reminded me before I come back around for one more question is Dunu Roy, who's also our senior advisor and one of the nation builders, always says that Sandeep, worker safety is seen by business as something about only workers. But the reality is that the driver safety is connected with worker safety because safer factories produce better quality products. And better quality products are safer for the drivers and for the car and the two wheeler and the truck and the bus. So it's not unrelated. If Japanese factories are good in the supply chain, they do produce very safe cars, and so, or Germans even more so, right? So there is a correlation here of driver safety, consumer safety, and worker safety, which something is getting missed on. And my father used to say on reputation all the time that it takes years to build your reputation, beta. He would say it'll take a day to lose it. Be very careful. Right. So I think that's really important. I'll go around one more round before we open to Q&A. So please post your questions. So Vineet, back to you, right? You heard Bharti, you heard Sophie, you have a manufacturing sector experience. We talk about appointment letters not being there. We talk about ESIC cards not being there, right? Basic safety mechanisms not being there. At least the first two are clear HR issues. Now, from your HR expertise, Why don't these things happen? What's the problem? Is it very expensive? Is it too difficult? Or is it just apathy, missed opportunity? What is it?
From what Ms. Bharti said, just take a cue from that. Point is moving from compliance to commitment. What she said very clearly in terms of companies. And Sandeep, you mentioned about Japan and Europe. Entire auto industry has gone 40, 50 years back when the growth started happening in India and picked up everything from Japan. Rightly so. So the learnings of productivity or trying to get the maximum was learned. But nobody, I think, spent enough time on looking at safety in Japan, which is very primary from those days itself. Anyway, coming to a point you mentioned, see, I can only say one thing. It is not some rocket science to make an appointment letter, right? The moment a taxation or a revenue issue circular is issued by the government, how much time do people have to delay it in terms of either a return or a form to be filled? Just tell me, how much time do people get? And yes, some people do crib, "Arey, this is a GST, this is that headache and all that." Finally, all fall in line. So I have not heard after 50, 40 years, people complaining that this was not done on that financial requirement. So what I'm trying to say is that somewhere the priority of people, and I'll just give one example. Some years back in Chorus, which is one of the companies run by an Indian company, a contract engineer or technician was crushed again. A bad accident, unfortunately. The compensation they had to pay was what I just looked at, 1.5 million pounds. So that is I'm not saying that you have to give blood money or cost money like this, but that is the compensation for one particular injury or death, fatality. So the point I'm making is in India, unfortunately, we take these things lightly. The whole thing on Factories Act became a little looked at after the Bhopal gas strategy. 85, 86, you had the safety officer appointment amendment coming. You had something about occupier, etc. I'm not saying we should wait till then. So that is one challenge that is there. So coming to HR or any other department, even if it's not HR, many companies don't have an HR department. To give an ESI card which comes from the ESI department is holding up the card. Nothing as वो जो लोगों ने बताया कि हमको दिया नहीं. I don't think some great value addition activity has to happen on that further. It has just to be handed over. So this is a little. And coming to the administrative part of making an appointment letter, many of the small scale companies may not have a full time department. I can understand. They don't at times have a full time finance manager, but they get one part time guy to come for a few days. You know it. Even the smallest place will get a finance guy to run because accounting में गड़बड़ नहीं चाहिए किसी को. But here things will be taken to chance. And the last but not the least, and Sophia ma'am also touched on it. The way people can get away is still very easy in this country. I'm not saying penal action is necessary for everyone, but there is more time spent with lawyers, sorry to use the word term, in finding out how can we circumvent the law, rather than spending time is how do we follow the law. And incidentally, on unionism, etc., maybe I'll just give a slight information. As a country, we haven't signed ma'am, what I'm talking about, Villa ma'am, right to organize convention. And Sophie, right to organize and unionize convention of ILO has not been signed by our country for principal reasons. I'm not saying it is right or wrong. So whatever getting at is whether it is appointment letter and these basics, as I call it, I think they are very rudimentary.
Yeah.
And it is just a escapism or neglect at the least. I don't think it's a big functional disability, etc., that we can't give or pass on an ESI card. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you. And again, we keep saying to brands that these kind of things, that they start pushing the supply chain, they can make a big difference because we have seen a correlation between non-compliance with ESIC and accidents.
Yes.
i.e., professional company is both safer and better compliant, and an unsafe company is also non-compliant and less productive. So we need businesses to move. And I'll come to Bangladesh in a bit, and maybe one of you can mention it. But Sophie, the new labor codes and their implementation rules and all the challenges that would automatically come into play, with state variations and everything else. Do you see a hope? Do you see, something that can be done better than the past with the clarity of these new labor codes and the stress on appointment letters and stuff like that?
I think there we should start with the enforcement mechanism under the OSH code. So now we have inspector cum facilitator under the code. So there are a lot of the things in the OSH code talking about appointment letter. We already talked about an appointment letter. And appointment letter is not a new legislative idea. It was already there is a traditional practice in the industry, and it was also there in the legislation called Sign Workers Act. So it is legislative ideas borrowed from Sign Workers Act, and now it is mandatory to be distributed to all workers. And that is also form mentioned in Rule 6. So while the appointment letter is a very welcoming legislative idea to put in such code, because the workers are ultimately getting a document to assert their working conditions now. But it is again subject to compliance by the employers. And talking about overtime hours, overtime work, overtime payment of wages, or payment of wages for overtime working hours, we also see that the standard has been kept much earlier, both under the Minimum Wages Act and under the Factors Act. It has been double the wages. However, when you look at the code on wages, now Section 27 of the OSH, when it talks about overtime working hours, it says the total cap of overtime working hours can be determined by the appropriate government. So it's a proviso. So while the main section talk about the rate of payment for overtime working hours, the proviso talking about the capping to be decided by the appropriate government. So we don't know how appropriate government is going to decide the capping, because it shouldn't go beyond the hours that we are generally talking about, right? Because 48 hours is the weekly hours, and it shouldn't go beyond 12 hours, including overtime working hours. And when the freedom is given to the appropriate government, because we largely know the debate just before the final draft of the OSH, because there was a lot of back and forth on how to increase the daily working hours up to 12 hours or more than 12 hours, and then accordingly doing in the sense contrasting off in the weekly working hours. So overtime working hours, though the provision is retained, but the proviso requires a little more constructive engagement. And when it comes to safety committees again, the safety committees under the OSH code, it generally talks about establishing safety committee. But equal representation of representatives from the workers and employers. But when it comes to safety officers, it makes a scale very clearly. So only where the workers are employed, more than 500 workers are employed, or 250 workers are employed, or 100 workers are employed in mines. So it's a very scaled up mechanism that safety officers under the OSH code. And why is that so? We all know that the industries are going fragmented. The investment has gone in such a fashion that the major campuses have been fragmented into small industry production units for a long time now. So it's this point of time we are talking about a certain scale of working population to have safety officer. In every, especially in automobile industry where there is metal work, there has to be a safety officer. So we see this half-baked legal provisions in essence or in principle, whether it talks about appointment letter, yes. In principle, whether it talk about overtime wages, yes. In principle, whether it talk about safety officer, yes. But when you look at the wordings in the law very clearly, there is a lot of constructive engagement that we need to make. Even look at the women's provision. One of the objectives of Occupation Safety Code was portrayed as strengthening women's participation in employment. The only provision that women's empowerment being talked about under the Code on Wages is under Section 3 and 4, wherein it says that all gender would get equal pay for equal work, which is not a new phenomenon. And also talking about equal participation in seniority, promotion, recruitment, etc., which was also all law. There's nothing new there. Whereas there was long-term debate on how social reproduction responsibilities of women should be read into the industrial laws, and they should be given certain flexible working conditions, considering their triple burden in their work life, in order to maintain their work life balance. And when you look at factories, again, the OSH code, the only two provisions wherein, only one provision wherein women's rights being mentioned as night work, right? And night work, it is based on their consent and safety provisions are being met by the employer. And in a place where there is a lot of power asymmetry, as we discussed, the consent goes for a toss. I don't know how much consent women can exercise, a women worker can exercise in such a scenario. So all of these need to have a standard operating procedure around how is it going to be operationalized in industries.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think I will come back again in the next question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I'll pick up your point on gender and women workers in the auto sector specifically because we know that ACMA, Automobile Component Manufacturers Association, has been tasked with increasing women workforce in the auto sector. And you are absolutely right. Unless the rules and the laws and the practices are discussed and some practical work is done around it, it's going to be only paper, right? So your point is well made. I think ACMA should be listening to it and talking to you about it, really. Sorry, Sophie, you want to make a point?
Yeah, I really want to make this point. Under OSH Code Section 110, it says if there is a grievance to the inspector cum facilitator, the inspector cum facilitator, before filing a complaint, an opportunity should be given to the employer about the
Yeah.
grievance made. So you are diluting to the extent that even after a complaint being raised, you're still giving an opportunity before going for prosecution.
Correct.
So it becomes a teethless tiger then.
Yeah. No, you're right. And we have been asking the brands that they should open up their grievance mechanism to their suppliers' workers because
Yeah.
that adds an additional protection for the workers and maybe a hope for better action. Bharti, I'll come to you last question as of now in this round. Bharti, a couple of global practices or best practices that you can tell us about or tell our brands about, our businesses about, where an industry or a country has done something around these lines of improving safety, improving working conditions, and gained from it at a business level or a country level.
Sure. I mean, the first thing where these gains have been made is when we have recognized that there is a problem, accepting that there is a problem, because unless we accept that there is a problem, then we can't work on it. So we've seen. I have not personally worked in the automobile sector, but I've worked a lot in the garment sector, in the tea plantation, coffee, rubber plantations. And one of the things that we saw was when people say, okay, yes, I understand there's a problem, let me do human rights due diligence in my supply chain, let me see what the problems are, let me map my supply chain, who are my vendors, who are my vendors. You don't need to disclose it to anyone, it's for you. But if you find any challenges, then how do you really address those? And it could be an incremental approach. It could be an approach where you take the trade unions and workers together, because once you start discussing problems, the solutions also come from the workers. And I've seen many times workers coming forward and say, okay, you can't do this, let us also contribute, we will do this from our side. So unless you talk, unless you have a dialogue, the workers also don't understand your problems. For example, we were working in Nepal in the metal sector, and we found that there's a problem of using mercury for Buddha statues. Mercury, young women, Sophie was talking about women, young women were applying gold and mercury amalgam to polish the statues, and then they fire, the mercury evaporates, and the gold Buddha statues is left. And you know if mercury is used, these women will not be able to work after 10 years, and they're all women from childbearing age. And we sat down with the association, employees association, and they said, no, this is a problem. let's find solutions. Can we do electrolysis? Can we do this? Can we trap mercury? Or can we tell the workers how to work so that they don't get exposure to mercury? And they came up with their own voluntary guidelines, a small handicrafts association, and asking their members to follow it. So it is something, it happened with the workers, with a dialogue. And the government said, okay, once you set up this voluntary guidelines, start using it, then we will be adopting it as a directive. We won't adopt it right now, we won't make it mandatory, we want you to use it. Similarly, in Sri Lanka, for example, in the plantation sector, we saw a lot of workers' hands getting, pressed. Same examples, but from the coconut sector. And there, very smartly, some of these businesses worked with inspectors and industrial engineers to find solutions. Is it worth, removing the sensor to make the operation 2 or 3 seconds faster, or does it make sense to actually have something which will make, use ergonomics instead of removing the sensor? Can you do things ergonomically better, make sure that the supply is reaching on time? And then by making very small modifications which did not cost anything, they could save so many lives, so many people, their hands were saved because of working together with the labor inspectors and OSH inspectors, as well as with industrial engineers together. Now, all these things, in Nepal, another area where we found that pesticide use was very high, and these were all very small tea growers. So you cannot have a safety committee in small growers. So we worked with the municipality to say that, because of pesticide use, cancer is happening. We need to work together. We need to have employers, workers, employers association, in that case, FNCCI and, others in Nepal, and we got together and got a safety committee at the municipality level. So the municipality and the mayor and the small businesses and the unions are now together working on increasing awareness on pesticide safety use, minimizing that. So there are a lot of opportunities that exist, but what happens is most of the time the companies get stuck in denial that everything is okay, or our auditor has said everything is okay, so we will assume everything is okay, or there's a checklist that we've given to the vendor and vendor has said yes, yes, yes. We have to go beyond that, because if something goes wrong in the supply chain, ultimately the big company has the biggest stake. So how we can, how we can actually work. And in another case, I will not name the country, but there was a case that was highlighted by an NGO child working in a plantation sector, and then it became a big news. But then the employers association, which was working with the ILO and the government and the trade unions, they said, look, yes, we know there is a problem, and that's why we have this action plan. It's an incremental action plan, and these are the things that we have done. So it actually, it makes a business sense to have this action plan, and don't get stuck in denial mode, but actually plan in your company, plan it with your vendors and their vendors. And some of the things that we do in occupational health and safety, because I've worked a lot on this, are actually no cost or very little cost. They don't cost anything. It's just that we need to involve the workers and have a dialogue at the workplace, and many of these problems will actually be solved. And then we need a dialogue at the sector level. What Vineet ji was saying was more like a dialogue and stakeholder engagement that we try to do on responsible business conduct, so that these things can actually reach, and we shift from that denial mode. At the level of the government, what Dr. Sophie was saying, we are also looking at how do we build capacities on modern labor inspection techniques. There are modern labor inspection techniques, and many countries have started using this, where the labor inspectors and OSH inspectors are trained on, ultimate objective is that people should be safe, right? That is what, trade unions also don't want companies to shut down. They want their workers to be safe. Businesses want to keep running. We want to increase productivity and efficiency. So how do we look at inspectors also as experts on these areas, where they can actually connect you to other companies, other experts, give you examples from other companies that, look, other company has done this, can you also do this? But we're not using them. we're treating them
Yeah,
as people
yeah.
who will come, and it's all about पैसा कितना लगेगा, क्या होगा, क्लियरेंस होगा कि नहीं, but instead they are experts. We need to actually use them, and they can connect us to good industrial engineers. They can connect us to experts in the industry who can provide this kind of solutions. So I think that is also very important, to engage with the labor inspection and OSH inspection system. And many times these MSMEs are not formally registered, which means they are not also covered by the labor law, and the OSH inspectors, labor inspectors don't reach there. No, some people might think it's good, but actually it is bad. It's bad for the big company, it's bad for the MSMEs also, because they don't have the money to hire an OSH expert. So these inspectors and big and once they become members of the employers organizations facilitate that. So I think that connect
Yeah.
with employers association, connections with unions can also help them reach more resources.
Thank you.
And last thing that I want to say is that when we look at ocean productivity, because this is something that is not being understood that clearly, but ILO is working in Vietnam, where we are looking at productivity ecosystem for decent work, where we look at different ways to increase productivity. And many times in OSH, removing the sensors or increasing the pace of the machine by saving 3 seconds in a cycle is not the answer. The productivity answers lies somewhere else, not in that machine, but somewhere else. And then you have to look at the productivity ecosystem in totality, and improving OSH definitely increases the productivity. So I think that's something that we have to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's so passionately and so clearly put. And you made the business case. I'll have to pause you because Dr. Sophie had said she needed to go at 4:30. Sophie, if you have to go, please go anytime. But thank you so much. We'll circle back with you and appreciate it. We'll close this event in 15 minutes. But Sophie, before you go, if you want to say anything,
So I would
otherwise,
largely say that we need to focus on, we need to maybe read OSH more carefully.
uh,
And also there is a provision now, Section 8, which talk about suppliers' safety responsibilities. So it talks about importers, suppliers, designers, manufacturers, liabilities. So our engagement should be, since there is a new word being used, because the word is not explained in the definition part, but the new word is being used. Maybe in the later amendments, we can suggest amendments more from the point of view of how the supplier's responsibilities and liabilities can be increased, and more in a more concrete manner can be written down in the law. So maybe we can work towards an amendment putting more
that'll be
liabilities
good.
on the suppliers. Yeah.
Sure, sure. No, thank you so much. Please stay
Thank you
only
so
as
much
much
for
as you
this
can, but
opportunity. I learned a lot, and I look
pleasure.
forward to become part of multiple opportunities like this.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Vinith, you want to say before we
Well,
go on?
taking a cue from what Professor Sophie said, so the future of sustainability reporting in auto, I think will be less about the respective plant, because most of the auto activity today gets done through suppliers. So having said that, I think as we see the future, either through our recommendation or whatever way we can put it forward, so we'll have to see how safely and responsibly the companies operates not only these plants, but how effectively it influences the behaviors of hundreds of suppliers that collectively, shape its environment and the whole activity. Because as I said, it's
Thank
no
you.
longer the plants. And
No, no, you're right.
this
You're right.
one can take from the global examples I shared, whether it's of Apple or whether it is of H&M or what we said of Nike. So unless auto industries really look at it, because it's soon going to come on in their backyard. It's already in their
Yeah,
backyard. It's going to
yeah,
be part of their activity. So
yeah, yeah.
increasingly they'll have to, and it's just not a procurement order or a quality audit they have to do. They have to look at it, I think, more holistically. That's all.
Thank you.